I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with justice for all. Okay. I would like to start off with welcoming a new member to the Harbor Board, Janelle Snyder, on my right. She has graciously stepped forward to serve. Terry has been here for 3 times now, so she's
third.
She's fairly new as well. So we were kind of shorthanded. We had 3. We had a quorum, but it was always kind of a little difficult because we all had to make it. Janelle brings the legal side of things to our table, so we have been without that for a little while, so that's going to be helpful. Tonight we have just one project to review. It's a repeat, but we want to see what they have tonight. It's HARB 2014-25. It's 120 and 124 Bloomingdale Avenue. Convert 120 Bloomingdale Avenue to a single-family detached dwelling. Demolish existing structures on 124 Bloomingdale Avenue and develop property with 5 new townhomes located in 2 buildings. So whoever wants to present, come up and introduce yourself. And I think you've been here, done that before, but we don't look at plans. It's site plans and elevations.
Good evening.
Did I just kill myself? Sorry. Thanks, man. So I'm going to have to go.
I'm George Brosman. I'm representing the applicant, which is the equitable owner of the properties at 120 and 124 Bloomingdale Avenue, which is in the R5 Residence District and also the South Wayne Historic District. We were here back in September with a different version of this plan. This plan has been scaled back since that plan. That plan had 6 new units, and this plan has 5 new units. When we were here in September, I felt like we received a favorable review. We were just here informally then. Since then, we have modified the plan, but we took some of the feedback that you had given us then to heart, mainly that the Newman Saunders Art Gallery building was an important historic structure, and we're preserving that. In fact, on the last application, a part of it was to be demolished, a non-significant part, and now we're just going to basically keep it as is and convert it back to its original historic use, a single-family dwelling. And we're here this evening for a recommendation for a certificate of appropriateness. We would be demolishing the existing structure at 124 Bloomingdale Avenue. That is a non-contributing resource in the historic district. And we have 5 townhomes that would go in its place. So we're here to discuss the exterior architectural features that are visible from the adjoining public street. And we have Bo Erickson here from the developer, and we have Laurie Sanders, who's our architect, and they're going to tell you a little bit more about the project. Same thing, it's obvious with regard to 124 Bloomingdale. That's a non-conforming office building with multiple tenants, and there's a parking area. We're converting back to residential use, which is more consistent with the zoning and more in keeping with the historic use of this stretch of the street. So with that introduction, I would like to call on Bo Erickson, unless anybody has any questions for me.
I have one question. Do you have, in our packet, which you gave us, these are renderings of the proposed buildings. Do you have any photographs of what's existing on the site right now? Oh, okay, great.
So this is an aerial. I think we showed this last time, just to get everybody oriented. This is Bloomingdale Avenue running this way. Lancaster Avenue would be off the picture here at the top of the page. And Bloomingdale Avenue, this is the block between Lenore Avenue and West Wayne Avenue. So 120 Bloomingdale is currently the Newman and Saunders Art Gallery, and that's this structure here. That is a contributing resource, and that's the building that would be turned back to its original historic use as a single-family home. The art gallery will be removed, and it'll go back to single-family home. And then this multi-tenant office building is pictured here at 124 Bloomingdale, and the PHMC form I have for the area indicates that that is a non-contributing resource in the historic district. So these are the two buildings on the site, this one and this one. You're welcome. Bo? Yeah.
You don't happen to have a site plan that has the proposed and the existing superimposed by any chance?
We have a sheet in our package, don't we?
No.
I mean, we had, I think, 3 site plans that showed an existing, then something about subdivision and steep slopes, and then there was a proposed, but there's not really an overlay between the two.
No, we have.
Hey, Bo, would you like a handheld? Would that help you? Yes. Okay. There you go. You're welcome.
Okay. What we have is we do have all of the existing architecture. And if we kind of start there from our initial feedback that we've received from this board and other departments and consultants of the township and the supervisor for this district, really was to maintain and or recreate as nice of a streetscape as we can with this plan. And so that's really been our overall goal. We have a property, 118 up here, and then the Newman Gallery, which are very similar in their fronts. Then we have the non-conforming prop or house that we are going to remove, which does not look similar. So we're looking at adding two new structures that will blend in with the streetscape. And feedback we received in September was that you would like them to have porches, you would like them to look Bloomingdale or front facing, and you also requested that even though they should look similar, they shouldn't be identical. So we have created a similar but somewhat differentiated look, which I think blends in very nicely with the neighborhood. The other thing that this will do, these two properties are currently being used as commercial, and historically Bloomingdale was a residential street, and these two new buildings will really bring back the look of a residential neighborhood along the entire block, which I think is one of the things we heard very clearly from you at the last time. On that, I'm going to turn over and let Lori go through the architecture of our buildings for you, unless there are any questions for me.
That's it for.
Hello. So common between these 5 townhouses, we have 5 different facade materials. We'll be using real brick. It'll be thin cut. We'll also be using a real stone thin cut as well, which the board here shows the brick soldier course with the stone as it will appear on the building itself. We'll also be using the James Hardy siding as well as the shake siding, which you can see there is on the courtyard of the one unit, you can see the shakes going into the courtyard. On the main facades, it will be the stucco, stone, and brick. The porches will be made of composite materials. The porch deck as well as the decks on the rears, or the sides, I'm sorry, will also be a Trex material so that it's maintenance-free. As far as the roof lines go, we'll be using a multi-dimensional shingle. One unit will have the gambrel roof, and the other one will have the mansard roof, which keeps in with the neighborhood and the traditional roof lines. The windows were stacked symmetrical, as they are in the other units and the other homes on that street. The dormers were taken from different houses so that it's a mixture of the neighborhood without being matching one another or another house on the street.
Well, one of the comments I had really quickly is the previous application, we had kind of a cluster home or a line of homes to the rear of this property, and there were two single homes proposed on the frontage, which, again, were taking some of the elements from the surrounding homes and being recreated, but in a slightly newer fashion. But you could see the massing and the shaping was sympathetic with everything. The idea of single homes on the frontage of Bloomingdale is one of the developmental patterns that is Bloomingdale, and also having those heights and those types of roof lines. Having an additional development in the rear was not visible to the street. It had more density, but we have similar things in the neighborhood that have happened that increase some density, but the facing to Bloomingdale was single family. The thing we really didn't address back then was the demolition of the house, which is non-conforming. We've since done a little research on it. There are two other or three other houses in the neighborhoods in South Wayne that are that style that are contributing. So, you know, it's a 1910 piece of history. Just a question is, well, did you ever look at this to save that house and do anything else in regard to that kind of a scheme? I mean, it's a commercial use only now, right? Or is it both?
It's a commercial use only, and it has a very strange addition on the back, which really renders the house unsalvageable in terms of I guess it could remain a commercial use, but it's been a commercial use for the past 15, 20 years unsuccessfully because of the layout and the structure of the building. So it would probably stay a unfunctioning, non-effective building. So we have looked at it, and everything that we saw is it should come down.
So removing some of the subsequent additions over time to bring it back to a single family and then trying to develop further was something that was not feasible, or is it?
It's not feasible in the location of where that house is situated on the property.
Okay.
Here, let me.
You mean you can't add leave it and then add behind another unit, is what you were saying?
I'm sorry, Beverly, what was that?
Well, I was just hearing what Bo said about it being located in such a way that you can't leave it, but add, rehab it or continue to add to it, but just leave it. But it sounds like it's in a bad spot.
And this is really small, but I don't know if you can pick that up. It's kind of way back. That was one of the.
Set far back.
That's one of the things. Another reason why we don't think it really contributes. It's way back. It doesn't follow the pattern, and so you can see it's way back here. So it's right in the wrong spot. And that, coupled with the fact it didn't meet the existing pattern being set way back, and that it's clearly listed as non-contributing, I think there have been a lot of alterations to it. So it's just not feasible. And we have to remember, we are R5 here, and we have a certain density that's permitted and townhomes are a permitted use. So, you know,
I mean,
we're trying to
I know
work.
there's the zoning aspect of it that allows you to do a bunch of things.
Pardon?
And the zoning aspect allows you to do some things that, you know, we may not agree with.
Right.
So I'm just asking the question because, you know, here's a, you know, we saw one plan that had 2 single-family houses and development in the back, but they were pulled further forward.
Right.
We have an existing house, you know, the question is,
Yeah.
if it's too far back and you can't develop behind it, and you've already looked at it and said, well, if I pared it down to a single-family house, that's like a very big single-family house on this street with a large lot, and you've proved to yourself that that's not a viable option financially,
It's not.
then those are things, we don't look at that, but we ask the questions about that.
The other,
Because that's a driving force, how
Yeah.
you do things.
The other thing with this building, where it's situated, as we discussed, if you look at the current placement of the structures on the road, they're all approximately 50 feet from the road, and then they have their front porches in front of them. You have that at 118, you have it at 120. 124 is set back probably 75 feet from the road, and then 128 is the same, 50 feet back with a front porch. So it's not conforming in, or it doesn't match all the other properties on the road. And that's why we believe it should come down and then have the 2 new structures added that we have proposed.
What did you, when you went away from the original design that we saw, what was the reasoning for that?
The main reason was that there was an issue raised about some slopes in the back here, and there was an issue raised that that was not going to be allowed, so we had to go away from that design and go over to here. And even under this design, we're being told that with this retaining wall here, if that stays, we're going to have to go to the zoning board for that. We think that they're mostly man-made slopes, but we've received the determination that we have to stay out of this area. So that made us, even though we were convinced before that that building had to come down for all of the reasons that we have said, and we had to come forward with a scaled-down development, less units, and we had to focus over in that area with these units. And we think this is, although it's not as many units, every developer likes more units, but we think even though we don't have as many units, we think this is still a very good plan, and especially in terms of the historic district. It's bringing back the residential use. It's being sympathetic yet distinguished from the historic buildings, and we have tried to be sympathetic to the views from Bloomingdale Avenue. Put a lot of time and effort into the front view of these from Bloomingdale.
Just a point I'm hearing, and the good news, bad news in my head is I like the attention to detail of the period and styles and front-facing features, and not the same. I like all of the things you're doing. I think hearing what you're talking about, the setback, retaining the setback of the block, I like. But the flip side a little bit, but I guess I understand what you're saying is what you're doing. This was not a multi-family, multi-building unit street. And historically speaking, it was a single family, and maybe twins, maybe there's a few twins too. And so, because in my mind, I think twins, singles in this district, seeing the depth, even though I know that's the site, the lots are pretty deep, and the homes are very rectilinear in fashion, to the most part. So in my mind, my first thought was, okay, twins, 2 twins, 4 units works. It's a little denser, and it breaks from the pattern of the street in a different way, even though you're doing a lot of good stuff too. Does that make sense?
Sure. And I should note that we hear your point on that, but this building right on the corner here, which is 118 Bloomingdale, the red dots are juxtaposed, but that is a multifamily dwelling, and I'm sure there are others in the area.
Yep.
But right there on that, in this block,
Oh, I see.
there is multifamily, and there might be some across the street, although I'm not positive about that.
Yeah, across the street, you have condominiums and very large multifamily buildings. The other component here, if you look at the size of our buildings to the existing structures, scale-wise, they're not really out of scale.
Well, I don't think I can agree with that, but, I mean, this clearly, to me, is not the developmental pattern of this street. I know what you're trying to do. You're trying to give the face of the street to look like a single. You know, you're really going with a gambrel instead of a mansard look. You know, we talked about whether we should copy or not copy. I mean, those can be debated. You know, the massing of 3 stories is where the massing is in height. But in terms of footprint, you know, this is the largest thing on the block. That one 4 or 3 unit. It's also got its own interior street, which isn't uncommon. So, you know, before we even get into any aesthetics, which we're not even supposed to really talk about, I'm looking at footprint and developmental pattern of this street. And one of the things that we're trying to keep in this township on these kinds of streets is that even if it goes commercial or whatever, it used to be a single-family house. We want that to stay as a mass of a single-family house, whether it goes commercial or residential. When they go to commercial, they tear them all down, it becomes all the same thing, the roads get wider, the neighborhoods are destroyed. So these kinds of little details that we're talking about are really important to maintaining the scale of a neighborhood. So that's just my comment on this. I mean, it's the one you presented before, as you know, you took down an older house that was non-contributing. We hadn't had the debate about whether that was a good thing or a bad thing, but you had 2 single houses that were on the street, and that was a good thing. And whatever you did in the back was sort of not visible from the street, really, and you know, had to be sort of an adaptive reuse of that site because of financial, you know, needs. So we understood that, and we sort of said, well, this looks like a good way to go. And the detailing on the houses, you know, was in a place where we sort of said, well, that's a good way to go as well. And now we're going into sort of blocks of buildings, which is totally different than the thing we talked about before. Even though what I'm looking at in elevation looks like a single house on either side, but it's not. And your viewscape as you go around them is that, oh, here's a single house. Oh, no, it's 60 feet long, or whatever it is. So to me, I think it's not in keeping with the developmental pattern of Bloomingdale in this area. That's just my opinion. So anybody else has any?
Well, if I could respond, I mean,
Yeah.
as I said, right here you have multifamily, right next to this. So, and I don't know when that happened, but you have it. And I think going back to residential from a multi-tenant office building with a parking lot, yes, it's not back to single-family dwelling, but we have multifamily here, right around the corner. We have Wicklow. We have the Edelberger development. I know that's not quite the same as this, but it's very, very close by, just around the corner. I think we're less dense than that, so I know it's not your purview, but we do have the R5 zoning, and we have to do
I understand.
a practical development under that. This is permitted use. We're taking away a non-conforming use, so we're trying to make the most reasonable development, respecting our property rights with trying to be sympathetic to the district.
The multifamily you're talking about is multifamily that used to be single family. So they've cut up an addition, you know, an original house and made it into multi-units. So the scale of that house is still a single family house, and that's what we're talking about. In anything that exists there that's been changed over time, you know, the single to multifamily doesn't really matter as long as it's residential and a house wasn't added to make it out of scale to the original intent. So that's just my comment on it. I don't think this has the criteria that we have in our ordinance to say, yeah, this is a good thing to do. I understand by zoning, by right, by whatever, and financially that you can't make the single work or the one that's their work. I understand that. But in our purview, that's what we have to comment on.
Right.
So.
Well, I'm reading the state statute that authorizes HARBs, and it says that the governing body, you know, the commissioners, when they pass on the certificate of appropriateness, they're supposed to address the appropriateness of exterior architectural features which can be seen from a public street or way only, and shall consider the general design, arrangement, texture, material, and color of the building or structure. So I don't see in the purview really where you get to say we can't have a permitted use. It's our use is permitted. How have we done the architectural features, and are they sympathetic? That's what I read out of the statute. And I can show you, I mean, I'm on the same block, but right around the corner. This is Adelberger, West Wayne Avenue. You've got these sideways multifamily units, and then a commercial building there. And then just down here, you have Wicklow. And I'm sure there are other examples I could come up with of, you know, multifamily dwelling. And this is the historic district map. I don't know if that could be zoomed in on.
You know, Wicklow is not Bloomingdale, so that's the problem.
Well, and the
That was a total commercial site that's become both.
and the both.
So it's not the same.
Isn't Wicklow and the other one, they're not the historic fabric of the community, they're
Yeah.
new,
I'm
right?
just saying, right around the corner, I mean, they're right there. You could walk there in 2 minutes.
Right.
So I understand this block is a little different, but within the
And
south.
Wawa is 2 minutes too. So I mean,
Yeah.
it's not the same space. So I understand what you're saying, but it's just not the same space.
All right.
So
I'm not saying it's the same, but it's the South Wayne Historic District.
Mhm.
I assume they got certificates of appropriateness for that. We think what we've done here is, you know, we think it meets the
I know
criteria.
what you're saying.
well, that's just, you know, I'm one person on the board. I've been talking, so maybe everybody else can
Do you
weigh
have
in
any
as well.
thoughts?
Yeah, I guess I have two concerns. One is going back to the building that's being taken down. I would have liked to have seen if, you said it wasn't possible to deal with it at all, but I just, you know, I'd like to be a little more convinced of that. But the second thing is the massing, and of what you're proposing. Would it be possible to have the two front buildings be a single-family house and separate it, and then have buildings behind that to alleviate the large mass? Because I agree with Cam. I think that, you know, the way that Bloomingdale, the difference between Bloomingdale Avenue and some of the other blocks that you've talked about is that Bloomingdale Avenue really is a historic street with a certain rhythm to it, and historic buildings, unlike, say, where the new development is on the corner of West Wayne and Conestoga. So I just wonder if this can be worked in such a way that it can be more in keeping with the rest of the rhythm
Well,
of the street.
If we do, we want to work with you as best we can. If we look at that and we make them singles, we'll pull them up to 25 feet, which they can be off the road. Then I think that goes against the streetscape. We've held them at the 50 feet and had them set back and had them be buildings of 2 and 3, which we think allows the streetscape to really be recreated in the way that I guess it was at one time or it should have been.
Yeah.
And we think that's the most attractive look. I mean, obviously there are multiple ways to do this. We think this is the best way that we can do it in a way that I think it looks very attractive and it can be redeveloped.
I do appreciate the fact that you've pulled it back 50 feet, and I think it makes a big difference. I mean, I think that's It's a good thing for the street. And I think that, looking straight on these houses, if we were to look straight on, as in an elevation, it would look great. The problem is the oblique, as you're coming down the street, that they do look pretty massive. I mean, on the other hand, it's new development. I understand it's new development and that, new development is not historic. They're not historic buildings.
Yeah, the other thing is, because they are set back as far as they are, and there is a lot of mature vegetation, large trees in the front yard that will be preserved, which we've gone through with the Shade Tree Commission, I think your view, looking back on these buildings is significantly blocked.
Could you just show, do you have any other pictures of the existing building? Or is it just that one elevation?
Right there. Can we zoom in on this?
Yeah, from this corner, it looks
This is it, right?
pretty,
It's taking up the whole.
Yeah, it used to
it
have a
looks like
front-
it has integrity to it.
It used to have a front porch. They closed it.
But, yeah. Yeah, see, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that helps. Yeah, that's, you okay?
Public meeting, please.
Sorry. Yeah, he was just showing me how the existing building is laid out, that the original part of it looks to be, looks to have an integrity, but that the back of the building has been very much changed, and there's a parking lot in the back of the other building. Am I paraphrasing you correctly?
This,
That run out?
I'm sorry. This building is much younger. It, I believe, was built in the, I think, the 40s or 50s, and where the other buildings here are over 100 years old.
I think it's 1910.
Yeah.
Yeah, the other,
This clearly isn't 1910. It's,
no.
been-
but
the
I mean,
original piece may have been.
Original structure is 1910.
But it is non-contributing, so somebody made a determination that it wasn't an important part of the district. And this is that site plan again. I don't know if somebody could zoom back. I showed this before, but you can see where it's located. It just doesn't leave any room really to do any other buildings. It's
This is R5, you say?
R5, yeah.
What are your setbacks on R5?
Our multifamily, it's 50. If you go twins or singles, it's 25.
Okay. Is there a possibility you could put a single in between the two buildings that
No.
are there now?
There's not,
That doesn't
there
work?
would not be enough room. We
Okay.
looked at that too. And the, that really goes against kind of one of the main design principles we set and we were instructed by the Board of Supervisors was to try to create by the commissioners, to create a streetscape. And that really kind of, we settled in on the 50-foot, which is the only way to match up. That way, every building on the entire block will have the same setback and facade if we put the porches on ours like the other 3 homes have, or 3 buildings.
Well,
I have a couple.
I mean, the other comment I have about just the buildings themselves, you're putting a streetscape towards the street that's really is a facade because there are garages behind that end of the house. There's no entry point. It's just you're sticking on porches to try to look like the streetscape. But in reality, you're entering from the center of the house along the courtyard. And that's just a window to a garage and a door that goes to a garage. And it looks like it's a front door to something, but it's not. So to me, it's kind of almost like a stage. On top of the kind of the massing issues that we were talking about. Do you guys have anything else you want to say about this, or, because I know we have some public or, did you have something, Janelle?
I have a couple questions. I know that townhouses are allowed in this area. How close are other townhouses?
How close in the area?
I mean, I don't really see any on this image you gave us.
I guess Bo is saying there's condos across the street. There's multifamily here. If you go right around the corner, you can see this. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 properties away from the corner. There's obviously this. This is the Adelberger site that I showed you the plan that has the multiple units on it. And right here is the Wicklow site. There's probably others. I'm not sure what some of these are.
I believe this is a twin.
This is a twin. I think there's an apartment building down here, so there's many, many examples right within this block here formed by Lenore, Bloomingdale, West Wayne, and Conestoga, and then across from there.
Okay, so you pointed out all the multifamily units. I was asking about townhouse.
Well, these look like townhomes to me. Wicklow, I believe, are townhomes, and Adelberger are townhomes. There may be others.
So
Yeah,
nothing on
and then
that
down
block.
further on Bloomingdale East, there are some apartment buildings, but that's another incursion into the fabric that was done before our time. And they're big blocks of, brick buildings or whatever. And then it goes back into larger single-family homes that have been taken and made into multis. So I think that's the argument we have, is that, there are examples around the neighborhood, but we're talking about Bloomingdale Avenue and this block. And on the far side of the block, you have single-family homes that have multiple uses now. There's some that are commercial, there's some that are residential. And then on the south side of the block, this house that you're taking down or propose to take down is the only, well, Newman was both, right? Wasn't Newman residential and commercial at one time or something?
I believe it was residential, and then it got approval to become commercial.
All right, so it's now going back to residential, and then the house you're talking about is all commercial at this point, correct?
Yes.
That is correct. And
So that's the only non-conforming on that, now, on that block.
well, you have commercial, and I wish Drew Saunders, who owns the gallery, was going to be here this evening. I'm not sure if the weather kept him away, but he obviously has owned the gallery for 35 years. His mother-in-law lives across the street, and he knows the 7 property owners right here on Bloomingdale very well. And he came to the Planning Commission and spoke very eloquently. 6 of the 7 that reside directly on Bloomingdale on this block are in favor of this development. We have one resident who's not, but that's of 6 out of 7 would like, and they would like to see the commercial uses stop because it's dead on the weekends. The commercial use is really not functioning.
I agree. I
Yeah.
agree.
So
I'm not saying
Yep.
anything about that. I'm just saying, how do we do this residentially and make it work in the fabric?
Yeah.
And you've had 2 schemes now,
Yes.
and I think the previous one we liked better. That's all I'm saying.
We might have liked it better, too. I'm
So,
not sure, but-
so here we are now. So what do we do with this? Okay,
Well,
so we're discussing that. I know we have some public participation that may be valid in this discussion, so if you guys don't have anything else to say
Sure.
right now, and you can always come back.
Just to
after.
focus on what Bo said, he does want to work with you on this, what we can work with. We can't change our use. Our use is our use, but we can work with you on, the appropriateness of the exterior architectural features,
Right.
and there's a willingness to do that.
No, we appreciate that.
I think, can I just add something? I think that one of the things that's disconcerting, and again, we're looking at renderings, but there are so many different materials, and we haven't discussed that at all, but there's so many different materials in these proposals. For example, you have the stucco in the front, I think, or drive it or whatever. Then you have clapboard or shingles on the side. Then you have brick. Then you have more shingles. And I think that having all those different materials tends to make the building look more broken up. that if the materials were more consistent with each other, that, okay, maybe you do have several, three buildings within this building, but if it were to look like a single-family house, maybe that would be more in keeping with the neighborhood. And that's just a comment. It's not, I'm not saying that, that it needs to be done.
It also helps to blend them in, so it doesn't look like it's 3 units. Whereas if we did one in stucco, one in siding, one in shake.
Is that microphone on?
I'm not-
This one's on.
Yes.
Yeah, you just have to get a little closer, I'm sorry.
So if we were to do it as a single facade for each unit, then it would look like 3 units, whereas if you blend the materials, they blend in together, so you don't know where one starts versus where one stops.
But what I'm saying is when you look at the side of it, for example, you have shingle, brick, shingle, which makes it look like 3 individual townhouses. If you had, and this is just an example, but if you have shingle, 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 then it looks more like it's one whole building, and the massing, I think, would look more unified. It would look more like a single-family house rather than 3 townhouses. And so in that regard, maybe it would look more in keeping with the rest of the neighborhood as single-family houses.
Okay.
I think you're talking about like horizontally, if it was all the same, like if you look at the other homes, in that it's horizontally stucco, even though it's horizontally, that, I think that's what you're saying.
Yeah, well, yeah, I'm just saying that right now, looking at it, not
Yes.
knowing it's in a historic district, it does have gambrel roof and so forth, but it looks like 3
It's broken
individual
up.
townhouses. It's like taking two twins, which are together, and one is painted white and one is painted blue. It looks like 2 individual houses, whereas if they were both painted white, it would look like one house, even though there are 2 houses, 2 apartments in it.
Also, correct me if I'm wrong, the elevations I'm seeing on the courtyard elevation, aren't they just of 1 unit?
Yes.
There's not anything that has them all gang together, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So, we are looking at single houses in the side and rear elevations and the front elevation. The only, thing we can look at is the kind of this perspective view, which is going to be foreshortened. So we really don't see how that all goes together, but I think it's good representation of what you're trying to do. But there is no really representation of how it looks in a line. So, that would be something that we would want to see if we move forward on this one as well. Can I get some public guys, or you might have something else?
I think my only quibble is with the, one, would be with the roof.
Here,
line.
use your
I'm sorry?
microphone. Yeah, sorry.
Um,
Just hit the button.
you-
Here, hit that button, that big button.
right here.
Yeah, see the lights on? Now you're good.
Thank you.
Okay.
That the roof lines used in the townhouses are the kind of sharp gambrel that you find in the early 18th century, and yet one of the special features of that block of Bloomingdale is the really beautiful mansard roofs. Now, they've been very badly done. There was a period in the 1970s where they were particularly badly done in apartment dwellings. But I noticed with these, as you look around at the buildings surrounding, they weren't just mansard roof, but they had dormers. All of them had very unusual dormers, whether they were curved. One of the things that makes them look special, they all had windows in the dormers, in the mansard.
Correct.
That in itself, I think, is a special feature vis-a-vis the some of the late or third quarter of the 19th century dwellings. I don't know whether that could be, there's so much involved in design, and I don't know whether that you could design something that would be more in keeping with the look of the other houses in that respect. But the gambrel roof
okay.
does not go with it.
The pictures from the existing streetscapes is where we were pulling the different dormers from. So we have the dormers coming through the mansard roof, which was copied on this lot. So that we have the deep overhangs, and we have the brackets and the trim line, so that.
They can't hear you.
Sorry. Do you want a handheld? We got another one, or you can use that one.
Turn that on.
I hate that little stick. I don't like that either.
Okay, so on this elevation, different aspects of the different parts of the two new product were taken from the existing streetscapes, be it the different dormers on the different houses. Some of them have the circle top or the arch top with copper roofs, and we were trying to mimic that so that it ties in with the existing product. While it's different in its own right, it is pulling different aspects in from the neighboring houses. So we have the deep overhangs, we have the brackets, much like 125, it has the same type of brackets, it has the same type of roof without having a flat roof.
I am not an architect by any means, and I don't know the names of any of these roof lines, quite honestly. But from just a visual perspective, we talked about the mass of these buildings is a lot larger than anything. And I don't know the percentages, I don't know if you've calculated them, but it's got to be at least 25% bigger than any other building on the street. So you already have this big, massive building. And then I see these as being extremely top-heavy designs, whereas a lot of the houses, they are stacked appearing, where the roof is a bit smaller than the floor above and possibly even the floor above that. Whereas these homes, the first floor looks cut in, the second floor is larger, and the third, they're almost upside down compared to what I'm seeing on the street. I don't know, as an architect, if you can address that.
Well, I will say, I guess part of it is the rendering. You're actually looking up at the buildings on these renderings, so I think it looks more, but we're trying to get the shadow line so you can see the actual detail as it's on paper. I'm not sure how else to explain it. The roofs, this one is the mansard, and it's, it's two different roof pitches going up, and then it will cut back. But again, the way the renderer has done the shingles, it's kind of hard to tell from that. Let's see, this side. It's a little easier to tell on the side elevation or the courtyard elevation. Again, it's the shingling, so it's hard to see that this is going up, and then it's also angling back.
Yeah, I think that's, as we go into this further, I think that will be a massing detail we will want to address, because it is a little roof heavy. I agree with Janelle on that. So, the mansard, I think, is a better choice than the gambrel, at least on the street face. I think that's probably a better choice. But I think this massing has to be addressed, and the way the building does not face forward. It's not really facing Bloomingdale. It's pretending to face Bloomingdale. And I think that's a really important thing to rectify. And it's an internal, it's that you can't have one plan and flip it, is kind of what you've got. You got to have maybe 4 plans instead. So it's a little different workload, but I think the street and the neighborhood deserves it. So that's kind of that's my comment for those two. And I think Andrea had a great comment about if the 2 front houses could be singles, and they truly are, forward facing, then what you do behind is offset somewhat. If that could be a solution that you could go for and make it work dimensionally and code-wise and whatever else has to happen, you're still going to have the same amount of units, hopefully, but you've made that distinction to the street and for that house, those 2 houses. In this type of a scheme where you're talking about multiple units. I still would love to see this older place, this 1910 place restored and something else done, but I know it's not on the table tonight, so. So I think if you have anything else you want to add right now, or I mean, we'll have a chance to go back again, but I just have some public participation that I think is important for this, so anybody here want to comment?
That was a good summary.
Good evening. I'm Greg Pritchard, and I live in Wayne. First, a slight disagreement about the designs, the overall aesthetics of the new plans. I sort of like, in a way, the incorporation of a side gambrel along with the mansard roof in the front. I think the difference between the old and the new on the street shouldn't be ambiguous at all to a viewer, and that's just my personal opinion about recreating mansard roofs and trying to get the proportions to match exactly what's there. I think it's a tricky business, and it's a kind of a difficult question to approach, and I'm not sure how you go about that. But I mainly want to talk about the if I can get my phone to work. I don't want to forget anything, so I'm going to read a bit. About the 1910 Walter F. Price House that's at 124 Bloomingdale. So I first of all have a concern about the process by which such a demolition is evaluated, and apparently in some sort of inventory the house was classified as non-contributing, and I'm not quite sure why that was, perhaps because it doesn't match the other homes on the block, which it is about 40 years different, maybe less than 40 years actually, but I think in general the South Wayne Historic District has as its period of significance sort of the 1870s through about 1915, and on the same block you have examples of homes from both extremes of that date range, and the 124 house represents the later extreme. So the assertion that it's non-contributing is false, and I'm baffled to why it was ever classified as such when homes not only with the same construction date and architect, but of the exact same architectural design were apparently classified in the same survey as contributing. The fact that it doesn't match the other homes on the block and dates from about 40 years later than them makes really no difference. It contributes to the larger South Wayne district, as I mentioned, with 1915 as its later boundary date. And it's also far better contributing to the block than a group of 5 side-facing townhouses would be, circa 2015. So I'm glad to hear, I was glad to hear during the last HARD meeting in September when this project, the first concept was discussed, that the board did not make any statements about the building without further research, despite the applicant's comment that it was unlikely to be more than 40 years old. It was suggested at the Planning Commission meeting just Monday night also that the house was designed by someone whose brother was famous, which kind of implied that the home's designer was somehow insignificant because he was overshadowed by someone with the same last name. And while it may have been difficult for Walter Price to make a name for himself when his brother was designing big Atlantic City hotels, Walter was a prolific and skilled architect in his own right who made a huge impact on Wayne and the larger area. He was one of the founders of the Haverford School and had a big impact on the National Register listed Rose Valley community in central Delaware County. And his granddaughter actually lives in his house there, and if you ask her, she'll give you a 2-hour tour of the whole area, and it's really fascinating. But anyway, his archives, Price's archives, have been meticulously cared for at the Athenaeum, and you can visit there and see really how prolific he was. And you can actually find the plans to this building, 124, which was, as I say, multiplied a couple of times in Overbrook, I believe, and a couple more times in Wayne. So really, in the past, this board has recommended against the demolition of structures with much less historical documentation, just for some reference there. I had some comments about density, and I think you pretty much share my same concerns, and the precedent that such a development might set for other blocks within historic districts that are zoned the same way. So among them are the south side of West Wayne Avenue, the west side of North Wayne Avenue between the railroad and Eagle Road, the north side of Runnymede Avenue, and perhaps a couple more. But it's probably because there are many multi-unit apartment buildings and formerly single-family homes on these blocks, and I think that's largely why. But if zoning is the only consideration, then I think properties on any of these blocks could be similarly developed. And with this case, I think you now have the opportunity to send a message that this kind of development shouldn't be allowed within any of the 3 historic districts. Now, this sort of thing has happened before, and of course, Villa Stratford is an example, the Adelberger property, but this is unique because it's within a cohesive block of largely undisturbed historic homes. Even if they have been modified, their uses have changed, and it really is one of the reasons, I think, this block is one of the reasons that South Wayne was both locally designated a historic district and also nationally designated a historic district. And I don't know the process by which this happens, but if this sort of thing, this sort of incursion were to occur here and elsewhere within the district, you have to start thinking about where boundary lines, when you're talking about national consideration and recognition of this district, if they would be redrawn because of these much denser concentrations being inserted in these neighborhoods. So, I think, according to the zoning rules, as was mentioned, I assume this development is allowed, but the rules are different within these 3 very carefully chosen and outlined historic districts in Radnor Township. And this board is the only body that has the ability to rule based on things like character and appropriateness within the neighborhood. And that's a unique and admittedly subjective power, but I think it's beyond evident that this development would not be in keeping with the neighborhood, with what the neighborhood accepts as appropriate for its surroundings. So thanks very much.
Thanks, Greg.
Hi, Baron Gemmer, South Wayne Avenue. My wife and I own the property directly to the left of these 2 properties as you view them. Sorry, we'll put something up in a second. Let me speak first to the fact that there was a new submission made right before the meeting here, so obviously I have not had a chance to look at that. So not knowing what your propensity is, obviously if you see fit to deny what you've seen, that's fine, or if you'd like to table it, but there's no way you should be approving this based upon a submission that was 2 minutes before the meeting that residents haven't had a chance to see. I would ask, I'm trying to figure out what the actual heights of each of these buildings are based upon what was submitted there. Do you know based upon what was submitted, or do we?
I think it's kind of premature to say what that is, but it's, the zoning code is going to mandate that.
I understand that, but part of your purview is the height to width ratio, so if we don't know the height, I'm not sure how we can gauge that for appropriateness within the district compared to the other homes. So I'll continue on. Just a couple of things that were mentioned earlier. Wicklow was built pre-Harb, so that's not an issue. Adelberger's Jardin, well, actually a split zone. The front is still was commercial and still commercial, where the flower shop used to be. The back was were the greenhouses and is now residential. That did get you should remember, that got a certificate of appropriateness. Again, different area. I mean, not necessarily bad architecture, but it didn't have to fit in with the particular blocks of Bloomingdale, but it did receive a COA. As Bo already mentioned, too, you mentioned the original plan actually did have a 50-foot setback. That's required per the zoning, the use that they're proposing. So both this plan and the other plan had a 50-foot setback. I agree very much with the front-facing issue, which is in the code under 178.7C3 in terms of the development pattern here. And as Cam, if you've mentioned that it's truly the facade because that's not the front and it's still around to the side, which I think is very important. Can I borrow?
You do your own. I don't, you submitted tonight, I don't have. No, I submitted, everything was submitted 2 weeks ago, a month ago.
There was, is there nothing submitted tonight?
You mean the elevation?
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about, the elevation.
Yeah.
May I have an elevation to show and point out?
But the main elevation was included in the previous submission also.
Yeah, we have
Yeah, the main.
line drawings.
Oh, I have them, I'm not talking about those.
Okay.
One of the things I wanted to point out here that with the porches that are shown, in the submissions that went to Planning Commission, and I'll have a zoomed in copy, but here are the fronts. There's a zoomed in copy of the front. They show absolutely no porches, so the architectural renderings that they're showing are inconsistent with the site plans that they presented at planning. This garage is exactly the width it needs to be for the two cars, so it's not like there's room to spare there. So there's not even consistency between the plans that they're displaying right now. Further, just a couple more points and I'll be done. As they mentioned too, there were steep slopes that caused them to make the change currently. There are still outstanding steep slope issues, so I very much doubt even the current layout will survive in exactly the same manner, pending redesign or zoning relief if they decide to seek it and would somehow get it. So again, my suggestion would be if tabling or if you've seen enough to deny it, and I'll leave it at that.
Thanks, Barry. Thanks. All right, Ian, would you like to put any comments on top of those two comments or add to it or take from it or? Yep.
I'll just be very brief. What Mr. Pritchard said that the non-contributing status was false. I believe that comment is false. I have the form here, and it shows it as non-contributing. And when we were here in September, the chairman had told us that it was non-contributing. So I'm not sure where he's getting that from. And as I said, we'll work with you. We would like your recommendation tonight. I'm sensing that may not be in the cards, but I have to ask. If not, we would look forward to coming back at a future meeting. Thank you.
Thanks.
Just a follow-up question relating to
Okay.
Is the survey that apparently says non-contributing for this house, is that an officially accepted document? And is it something that you go by often for either this or other districts?
It's, all we have we have a South Wayne and a North Wayne inventory that were done in maybe 1984 and 91 or something. It's been done quite a while. I forget which one is which. They're outdated. There are some omissions. So I think what you were stating is that there's similar houses that are contributing. So, you know, this one has all the history that could make it contributing. I think it was decided is that it didn't fit the fabric of the 1890s.
The block, yeah.
And at that time, that was what they were worried about.
And that,
Now,
yeah, that makes sense.
You know, so, you know, you get 30 years beyond, and all of a sudden you're rethinking how you evaluate that stuff. And so we're looking at this now, and there are plenty of houses around that we look at and say, I can't believe we can't even talk about that or save that if it's going, you know, if somebody's going to put it under the knife. And so we're trying to look at, you know, single site targeting, I don't know if that process, if anybody wants to do that. It's cumbersome, it's a lot of paperwork, it's, I don't know if the township really wants to do it. We've recognized a bunch of them, but I think that's what happened, is that it was in that 20, 30 year ago evaluation, and it just was not, it didn't look like something that was supposed to be there. There were, all these, mansard roofs, and then there was this, and they just said, well, that's not part of this.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah,
I think
but
that's how it was.
I can see how that would happen, and on the 200 block of Midland, where there's an identical example, it's within houses of the same period, so
Yeah.
you can see why that would. Okay, well, if people are referring to some outdated survey and it may be considered legally binding, something like that, and I didn't find it on the township website anywhere. I don't know if it's posted or even publicly available, but it should be made clear if it's not something that should be trusted, then that should be made clear to Mr. Brosman, any applicants really. So,
Yeah, we use it as a guideline to kind of validate what we feel about it today. Is that back then somebody went through and did this arduous task, and they made a whole list of buildings, and they tried to put architects and builders and times and structures and materials all in this inventory. A lot of them have the street address and non-contributing or contributing and no other information.
right.
And that's, ridiculous, but that's the way it is sometimes. So it's not a governing factor for us, but it certainly is something we look at initially. I will look up an applicant's address and say, okay, even though it's come to us and said it's in the district, I will make sure it's in the district, looking at the district maps, and I will look at the inventory and see what it says about it. Because sometimes it'll give me a date and an architect, and I can go further research it, or call you, which I've done a lot.
Right.
So that's kind of my initial one, but other than, contributing or non-contributing is not sort of this balance point on this board that I'm aware of that says yes or no on it. It's consideration, though. But I don't know what the weight is legally. I don't know what that is. You may know from.
I think it is legal. I mean, you did with the best you could. You saw what there was legally, I say legally, what was formally created as a district, and you read non-contributing. And I think we might need to take on a role of revising some of that so that everyone is on the same page. Because I think what Greg is saying is it shouldn't have been, or now we look back and say, perhaps it was contributing, but to your eyes, it was not contributing, right? So I think maybe we need to discuss revising some of that. I think PHMC does, in some ways, wish for every 5 years people could revise something to go back and say, well, that building's not there anymore, or that building's been changed.
New information's
New
come to light in
information.
research, right.
So
Well, it's definitely
we're-
time.
We're overdue.
But the question that's come up is if it's a contributing structure, and we deny a demolition because of that, it probably is never going to be just because of that, but is there a legal precedent that, maybe you know too, a legal precedent that those two comments have that kind of weight within our ordinance? And I don't know, you know?
Yeah, that's a good question.
I hate to get into this, but the board was set up as a recommending board only. Legally, George has always had the position, not Mr. Brosman, but George had always had the landowner's legal rights and what you're allowed to do, and John kind of followed with that. So it's always been the, more or less, that you can recommend that you maybe don't feel that it is. Anybody either above you or beside you trumps that. You're not a legal board, you're a recommending board. All right, so there's only certain things that you comment on your purview. And I know that's always been a rubbing point, but at any point, if the commissioners say okay, or it goes to court and it gets okayed, it just kind of is there. So we've always tried to be the helpful end of it and kind of steer people or, advise people that way, as opposed to trying to say, no, you can't do it. And then, just have it go further. But
Well, yeah, and I just note that in the ordinance, there's no mention of surveys or the words contributing and non-contributing
I-
never appear, so.
I think that's a
I
National
think-
Register district terminology, not a
Hmm.
local historic district terminology. So maybe it's a moot issue in a sense of whether, not moot, you know what I mean? There's nothing legal in the sense of the ordinance.
It's information.
It's information.
Right.
From another source that is relevant, but not legal, if you know what I mean.
Mhm. Okay, all right, that's all, thank you.
All right, well, anything else from you guys? Okay. I guess I've kind of said all I need to say about my misgivings of this. I think the things that we talked about in terms of how we would like to see this proceed, trying to get those two up front Bloomingdale houses single and facing forward and maybe setting the other ones back. They can be connected or not connected, or, you know, however you want to deal with that. Those are the biggest points I have to, you know, that's the massing, and the development pattern is maintained to some extent when you do that. So if you can get into that kind of a mindset and it works on your plan, that's something I'd like to see you strive for. So the way it's presented here tonight, I feel like I can't approve this plan as presented. So that's my feeling. Well, I think we have to say yes or no, and then you have to do some work. Or is that, do you have another comment on it?
Is there anything else? Because last time you told them you didn't want them to look alike, you wanted them different. Now you're saying you want them to kind of look alike. Is there anything else next time back that you'd like to try to see? Or is there any suggestions, should Mr. Brosman decide to go right to commissioners meeting and ask for approval with your disapproval? So is there anything else you would like to try to recommend so that if they come back, they can meet it? Or second, there might be something taken, should they decide to get out of the recommending board and go to the other board?
I would have one recommendation, and again, this is a recommendation, and I would like to really see more about the feasibility of possibly somehow using 124 Bloomingdale Avenue in some way. I mean, could it be moved? Could it be added on to? Could it be, I mean, I don't know, you know, it wasn't addressed, but that's one thing I would like to just know about a little bit more. I do sympathize with the developer in the sense that he was told that it was a non-contributing building, and, you know, so I don't know what the legalities of that are, but I really, I think it's a really, you know, I would love to see it kept, but having you been told that it was non-contributing, it's a funny position. I mean, I understand that if you had thought it was contributing, that perhaps the sale would have been different. I mean, it goes back to a lot of things. So I think it's something that we need to work on, really, because I don't think it's fair to the, as much as I like the building and I think it should be preserved, I don't think it's fair to the developer to think that it's non-contributing and therefore it can be raised, and then be told that, you know, it's something else. But I do think it, I mean, I would love to see it saved. That's just a comment. And I would love to see, if there were any way that you could break up the massing in terms of the two front buildings, you know, I think that would be helpful.
I'd also like to, you know, anything that's being torn down from now on, we want to have a walkthrough. We've had plenty of people bring in engineers and say, this is horrible, this is bad, it's got to come down, and I've been out to them, to different sites, and that's not the case. So if we're going to take down a building of this statute, I would love to have that opportunity to do a walkthrough before we make that kind of a recommendation or agree to that recommendation. That would be the only other comment.
Cam, first off, that's not your privy. Second, it's private property. And third, there's going to be, I don't think any way legally that we're going to have the last say in this. So before you throw that comment out there, I know you and I have discussed this before. I know what you would like, but I can tell you what isn't going to happen. You're not going to come onto someone's property and tell them they can't do what they need to do because, in your opinion, it's not it. It just doesn't happen that way. So I can appreciate you saying that, but publicly stating that on TV and in front of everybody puts the township and the board as a recommending board in a bad way. We shouldn't be making legal policy.
As a recommending board, we need to have information to make those recommendations. And I feel that's a pretty good component of that.
And you can ask for that information and get it, either from an engineer or an architect or someone else. But for you to say that you must perform an inspection on someone's property, legally.
You don't have to call it an inspection, it's a walkthrough.
I think the given a chance to
Well, here
look.
again, can I come through your house? You're going to tell me no.
I'm not inviting you over.
Well, no, okay, so you're not coming to my house either.
No, but this is a specific project with a specific request.
But understand,
you know?
just because someone has a project doesn't give anyone in the township legal right. That's called trespassing. You can't go on there and walk through their property.
All right, well, let me ask you this.
And it can't be made a condition of something to do this. I mean, I just don't think that's.
If you are tearing this house down, you're going to go through and walk through and make sure all the mechanicals are turned off and all the, you don't do any of that? Who does that? Somebody does that.
No, we get a letter.
When he shows up with a bulldozer, township does not go in and say, this is a safe condition?
Letter.
I know it's different, but for the county, though I can't just walk on someone's property, I can contact them and say, I need to do the subdivision review of your buildings being demolished. When can I come look? And they tell me when to come. I mean, I'm not, when they say it's okay, it's okay. But that's county, but that's different, I guess.
All right, so you're basically saying that doesn't happen here, or won't happen here, or can't happen here, or whatever?
Has it ever happened since you've been on the board?
Yes.
Yeah, actually.
Who?
There was a detached garage that we went
Yes.
and we did 2 inspections.
And we messed around for a year, and the guy ended up ripping it down anyway.
Well, we
One
had a chance
stayed,
to
one
look.
was torn down.
All right.
I mean, you know, yeah. I think Bloomingdale Avenue, the original houses there, we looked at
I
them.
think we did.
We didn't go inside, but we looked around. Oh, maybe we did. But anyhow, it's, if you say we can't do it, you know, that's the way it is, but,
I think it would be reasonable, though, to request, say, photographs that show each side of the house and show it from public points of view. Because it's really hard to evaluate a house like this, not seeing all elevations. I mean, we don't know the extent of, you know, and if it is true that so much of it has been changed and demolished and isn't significant, that would behoove the developer to show us that. You know, that yeah, we can't deal with this because so much has been changed. It would help everyone if we had at least, even if we didn't go out and inspect it, at least if we had photographs or some kind of visual, you know, visuals that show us what the building is really like.
well, I don't think we're going to get that.
So, no, but
So,
I guess I'm coming to Ray's point, though. Do we have any other points to make, is what you're saying? I don't, but I like the idea of working towards a goal that can work for everybody.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's, the recommendations we talked about, are you willing to look at that? I mean, that's, or is this the only thing you're going to do? I mean, we're going to say, my opinion is that I can't approve this based on what you've given us. The recommendations are what I just laid before you. The board is either going to agree with me or not, and we'll vote, and whatever happens, happens.
What we'd like to do is, well, take some of your suggestions, some of them we.
Yeah. Sorry about that.
we've heard your suggestions, and we will look at some of them. Some of the things I know that we can't do, but we would like to look at the plan, look at some of the things that you've suggested to make the units maybe look more attractive from different angles and mix the materials, and consider the suggestions you've made. And we would like to then come back and see you guys next month.
Okay. Well, assuming, I don't know if everybody's with me or not, but we'll vote on that. So we should vote based on what we have before us tonight. So I'm going to make a recommendation that we should not approve this plan as recommended, based on the massing and the departure from the developmental fabric of this neighborhood, which is part of our ordinance. Anybody second that?
I second it.
All in favor?
In favor of not
Of not
approving.
Yeah, of not approving? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5? Okay,
Yeah.
we got a unanimous, okay. So we've got a unanimous disapproval, non-approval. We'd love to, we do want to see something happen here. I mean, it's just that we need to make this thing work a little better. So if you want to come back, as you said, that's wonderful. All right? We better not talk about that now. That's, all right, so that's that determination. Next thing, we have any new business other than you're a newbie? Are you having fun yet? Okay. Any old business that we need to go over?
You need to have a reorganizational meeting since you now have 5 members.
Do we do that off camera and then do it next time, or what? Yeah, let's do it next time, because this is the first time we're all together as a board. So, okay. All right, so I'm going to make a motion that we adjourn. All in favor? Aye. We're closed.